Hey there, Eric Chessen, founder of Autism Fitness, leading the movement for movement and bringing you another edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, where I take a concept, a practice, something that we use in our autism fitness programming for the ASD and neurodivergent population and bring it to you in an explanatory and yet workable way. If you have not already subscribed, please do definitely like. I think I did that backwards. Everybody does like, subscribe. I'm doing subscribe and like. And of course, share it with anybody for whom it might make a beneficial impact in their lives or the lives of the individuals that they serve. In this edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, I'm going to return to a popular topic and one that is often misconstrued, and that is around core training. Specifically, core training for the autism population, because it's something that comes up frequently, and the core, as I often note, is something that is nebulous because it is typically poorly defined and means everything and nothing at the same time. It's either too specific or not specific enough. So I'm going to discuss the core a little bit and then what the implications are for training with our autism and neurodivergent athletes. And I hope this one is helpful because I get asked about this often enough, and not in the internet way, everybody keeps asking me or people keep asking me. No, I get questions about it from families and other practitioners. So I'm going to cover it yet again. So when we talk about the core, what people typically think of as the core is just the transverse abdominis, also known as the six-pack muscles. The important thing to know, among many important things to know, is that everybody has abdominal muscles. Whether they are visible or not depends on level of subcutaneous body fat, right? So the lower the body fat, the more visible the abdominals are going to be. This is not necessarily an indication of the strength or functionality of those abdominal muscles. NFL linebackers, sumo wrestlers, powerlifters, strongman athletes all have very strong abdominal muscles that oftentimes you cannot see because they have higher levels of body fat. But the abs are always there. The issue is if we just relegate the core to the transverse abdominis, we're missing the whole piece, literally and figuratively. So the core is actually the entire trunk of the body, and there are other muscle groups that are involved here. We can even consider the spinal erectors, and of course the obliques, and some of the internal stabilizers around the transverse abdominis as well. Now, implications for the autism population. Oftentimes with younger children, they are diagnosed in physical therapy as having low muscle tone and weak core. The issue with weak core is, number one, it is going to create challenges in daily activities and mobility and ambulation, gait pattern, etc. It does have some implications here. But there is not just one way to go about training or strengthening the core. There are certainly exercises that can target the abdominals, but we want to take a more systematic approach and incorporate different strengthening exercises that will contribute to that core functioning and may have a secondary or even a tertiary benefit to the trunk and the core as a whole. What do I mean by that? So let's take our fundamental movement patterns. Our squat, our press, our push-up, our pulls, our standing row, our pull down, some inverted row or pull-up progressions or modifications, our carries, our hinges. All of these are going to contribute importantly to general strength. They are going to be localized to that focal area of the body. So squats are going to be predominantly the legs, a lot of posterior chain. Overhead pressing is going to be predominantly shoulders, a little bit of tricep. And there is a stabilization component with the trunk, with the core, with the transverse abdominis, with the six-pack that is going to take place in order to stabilize the athlete in any one of these movements, particularly with our carries, the farmer's walk and the heavy carry done with a sandbag or similar object. These are going to contribute to the stabilization, meaning able to keep that compartment, that core, that middle tube, rigid and contracted during that movement. So it's not just one exercise that's going to contribute to core stability or core strengthening. Now, when we get specific, if we say that we want to target and we want to strengthen the abdominals, then my recommendation for that has a couple different layers to it. It's nuanced, as it always is. Nuance number one is, do we have an athlete who has enough kinesthetic awareness that they can do a single or a bilateral lying leg raise, which is good for getting a decent abdominal contraction, and it has an eccentric component. I like this way, way, way better than a plank, and the reason that I like this better than a plank is not sheerly for personal reasons, but because it's far more effective. However, we need an athlete that has a sufficient baseline ability as far as their kinesthetic awareness, and then a sufficient baseline ability as far as that motor control and strength. So even though that lying leg raise, and I'll talk about some of the other options and why they're disadvantageous in a minute, but we have to ensure that the athlete has some of those other baseline physical skills first. So well beyond the well before the point where I'm going to introduce a lying leg raise, I've got to have that athlete squatting and pressing and doing a push-up or a modified push-up, doing standing band rows, doing a lot of carries, so that all of these, think of it like Voltron, all of these different heroes, robots, are coming together to form one enormous hero robot to take on evil. The evil that is weakness, right? So all of these other exercises being factors in contributing to stabilizing and strengthening the core or the abdominals are something that we can't overlook and just say, okay, we're going to do a lot of core training for this athlete, because they all have components of core training and they are all important. So well before I have that athlete do something like a lying leg raise, either single or bilaterally with both legs, I want to ensure that they have the underlying strength in all of those other movement patterns, because that is all going to benefit their overall core stability. Now, there are a couple different exercises, you may be very familiar with them, that we don't use in autism fitness programming because the cost to benefit ratio is not in the favor of safety or of the actual efficacy of the exercise. And if you're thinking crunches and sit-ups, then you are correct. Not because these are inherently bad exercises. And what's been interesting over the past several years is the research on spinal flexion has demonstrated that spinal flexion is not as bad as we initially thought it was. So doing crunches over and over and over are not necessarily going to give someone low back pain. Doing cruddy crunches or with poor form over and over and over might contribute to some low back pain. But you need, again, that baseline stability and strength in order to do it correctly and have it have any benefit whatsoever. So just because you get an athlete into a crunch position or a sit-up position, and just because they are jerking their neck forward and coming up a little bit, does not mean at all in any way that it is an effective abdominal exercise for them, because there is a lot of compensatory movement happening. Most of the time what we see, and I see this all the time with general population, is they are cranking their neck in order to create momentum to get up into that sitting position. But as far as an actual target exercise for the abdominals, nothing is happening and they're flopping backwards, so you're not even getting a decent contraction when they are going into that eccentric. So rather than do something that is a minimal to moderate safety risk, and worse than that, at least in the short term, is just going to be ineffective, I would rather get that core stability and strengthen that core through a variety of different strength exercises that, even if they don't have a direct stimulus to the abdominals, do have a secondary benefit. And then if we need to do more specific targeting, then we can add in that single leg and eventually that bilateral or two leg lying leg raise, which is going to have more of a direct targeted effect to the abdominal wall. So the core training that we're talking about needs to encompass all of these big gross motor movement patterns. Again, our squats, our pulls, our presses, our push-ups, especially our carries, because those are going to introduce that strengthening and stabilizing effect without some of the potential detriments of something like a crunch or a sit-up that the athlete doesn't even necessarily have the baseline capability of performing to any type of effective degree right now. Even if we modify it, there are just better things to do. So the reason I bring this up is because it's a popular question and we need to identify what we mean by core. Certainly there are some gross motor deficits that we see, particularly in children and adolescents with autism and in the neurodivergent population at large. We just need to be very specific and operationally define what we mean by core function or core dysfunction or core weakness. And a lot of these deficits are going to be matched and going to be strengthened by the foundational exercises that we include in our programming. We just have to introduce them correctly, and we have to coach and program them at sufficient level of challenge or modification and sufficient frequency in order to deliver a training effect. I'd love to know any other core questions that you have, because again, this does come up pretty frequently. Leave those in the comments below. If this has influenced or impacted the way that you're training your athletes, if this has been a light bulb or even a dimmer switch moment for you, leave that in the comments below as well. I'd love to know. And of course, if you have questions, if you have a topic that you'd like me to cover in a future edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, leave that down there also. Would love to answer it, would love to cover the topics that you are interested in. I'm Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement. Thank you for watching.